we spoke to Rosa Brooks earlier, getting into Jimmy, but underneath me is Voodoo Child. And this was done when Jimmy was starting to get a little bit more freedom. And speaking of freedom, he had gotten his own recording facilities, which was then a state-of-the-art recording studio. And by today's standards, it's still a state-of-the-art recording studio. And why do I know that? Because I happen to have on the air with me the guy who designed and built that studio, John Storyk. John, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you.
Hey, man. Thank you for joining me. Before we say anything, just let me run down just very briefly this guy's accomplishments, man. This guy, he built studios for Hendrix and Marley. Now we can stop right there, because that's these guys are my two prophets. And then he built studios with Whitney Houston, Jay-Z, Aerosmith, Alicia Keys, Bruce Springsteen. Over 2,500 world-class audio-visual productions and facilities. Radio stations, entertainment clubs, and theaters. He established courses in acoustics, adjunct professor of acoustics and studio design at my alma mater, Berklee College of Music. Hey, man, thank you for joining me here on Cold Blue.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Important day for all of us, I suspect.
Yes. And you're a musician yourself, don't you?
Well, I started off as a musician. I was a musician in growing up all through college, and an architect. Actually graduated not knowing which career or which direction I would go to. I guess kind of combined both of them pretty quickly, and still play, but not publicly anymore. Okay.
Just for your own pleasure. Well, you know about music. You were trained in music at some point, right?
Oh, absolutely. Trained since I was a little kid. Piano player, organ, sax, a little bit of bass. Absolutely.
Did you find it that helped you?
And was in a basically in an R&B band all
really?
through college and even out of college, and actually used to go hear Jimmy play at the club that he bought, which became the studio. It's kind of an irony that I would play around. Only a few years later, got to build that studio for him in that club. And of course, as you know, the first idea for the studio was in fact a club. That's how it started. It was originally supposed to be a club before it was supposed to be a studio.
Why did he change his mind, you know?
Well, he used to jam at that club on 8th Street. It was a blues club. Of course, it was built in the 20s. It was more or less a speakeasy polka club. And he bought the club. He didn't buy the building. He bought the club. He and his manager, Michael Jeffrey. And I think at the sort of 11th hour, we were hired to do the club. We had done a small club in New York that he frequented, and basically got myself to design this club for him, which of course was quite a thrill for a 22-year-old rhythm and blues piano player / architect. But at the 11th hour, he was convinced to not build the club, but to make it a full-fledged, state-of-the-art recording studio by more or less his engineer-producer, Eddie Kramer, who's became a lifetime friend. And I think we all owe Eddie a debt of gratitude for making that decision. Even the club was going to have a small recording area in the back. It was a little bit of a novel idea at the time. But in the end, Eddie convinced him to make a recording studio basically just dedicated to artists who could at last not have to be pressured by the clock so much to make recordings. It was quite a novel idea at the time in 1968, 69 to do something like that. And that history was written right there on 8th Street.
That's sure enough. And definitely kudos out to Eddie Kramer, man, who not only, he actually taught Jimmy how to use the recording studio as an instrument.
Oh, absolutely. He taught a lot of people how to do it. And basically we all kind of dove in together as much younger professionals at the time. It took over a year to build the studio. And, at the time there were no books on how to do it. A lot of it was seat of the pants, but we did get it done. Of course, Eddie and his manager stuck to it, raised the money, at the time, it cost over $1 million, which was a lot of money then. Also, building a studio south of 42nd Street was almost unheard of. There were no studios in Greenwich Village, so there were a lot of firsts to the studio. It's never stopped being a studio. It's actually one of the oldest, and certainly the oldest major continuously operating studio in the city.
Wow.
Still in the same location. Nothing's changed, and many parts of the main room are still exactly as we did them, just simply unchanged.
Now the sound designing had to be something special because of the subway system at that point, right?
The subway system was a problem. The isolation techniques that we used are still some of the same techniques we do today. The site always was a terrific site for a studio. It was in the lowest floor of the building, very high ceilings, very few columns. It was a concrete building built in the 1920s by, in my opinion, a very famous architect, a rather unknown Viennese architect, who, ironically, I had studied about at school. And again, another twist of fate that I would be playing around in this building. And even though it had a theater above it, which lasted well into the 90s, it was pretty isolated, in fact. And we built all the walls out of sand-filled blocks, still to this day, same walls, nothing's changed. Some people have said they hear a faint drop of the 6th Avenue subway. I myself have never heard it, but for all intents and purposes, we were successful in creating the isolation that was required for the rooms.
Yeah, now you mentioned about the money. Now, Electric Lady was expensive then, and you said by today's standards, it still would be considered expensive, right? Would you say?
By today's, you probably could build that studio for about the same amount of money today as you built it in 1969. We're just so much smarter now, and we have so many more creative techniques for this kind of career. I mean, little did I know in 1969 at the age of 22 that I was going to embark on this as a career. Actually, I was still playing regularly when I was building this. But hats off to Jimmy and Michael Jeffrey, both passed away, of course, for sticking to it. And Eddie and another individual that we need to remember, Jim Marin, who just passed away this past year, who was the studio manager and leader of this gang to go get the project built. This is where the main energy came from. It was quite an adventure. I'm not sure if any of us realized we were, the adventure that we were doing and some of the novelty that we were creating, and this and other studios around the world being created by artists. The artists were taking control. This is what I always remind people. Artists were taking control of their own recording destinies really for the first time. And of course that ushered in an entire new era of studios and ultimately a new era of record production and record marketing, of course.
Good point. That's an excellent point because that had an influence on Jimmy. When he jammed with Stevie Wonder, after the jam, Stevie told me that they spoke about the new concept of playing all the instruments in the studio and creating what Stevie called a fourth dimension, something like that. And this had a profound effect on Jimmy, and he was able to do that at Electric Lady.
Well, Jimmy's vision of the studio was not a machine. It wasn't a place where musicians came. They were on one side of the glass. Engineers were on the other side of the glass. They came in, they did their work, they left. And then the content moved sort of through the music industry food chain and out to the consumer. That's more or less how most records were made since the beginning of records. And Jimmy's vision was different. He viewed it more like a home. And he didn't want that clock to be running. And the only way to do it was to have his own home. And every aspect of this, of course, for me, I had no vision to compare this to be honest with you. I'd never even been in another recording studio. Even though I'd been playing, I had no reason to be in studios. So to me, this just seemed like a natural idea for a recording studio. Of course, anybody listening to this now would say, what's so new about that? That's, of course, what a studio should be. But try and go back to 1969 and imagine that this is not what was going on. And so he just made his own home. And everything about what he wanted was more residential-like and home-like, and the surfaces needed to be soft. They needed to be able to be changed, even the lighting, the mood, everything about it was to allow Jimmy to more or less live and make his music there. The irony, of course, is that he passed away, of course, much too soon for all of us, and almost no sooner did he leave than Stevie arrived. And Stevie ended up living in Studio A for almost a year with Bob Margoloff, who also became a lifetime friend.
Wow, I didn't
Bobby
know that.
and Malcolm, who became their producer engineers before Stevie moved to the West Coast. So it's almost as if somebody was watching this. Okay, one artist has now left us. We're just going to take another artist, also a great artist, as we all know, who also had a similar image of how to make music in a home, in an environment where the clock wasn't ticking. And sort of like Jimmy left and Stevie arrived, and he basically took over Studio A for almost a year.
That's incredible. See, I didn't know that. Hold on a second. 89.1 FM WFDU is where you got your dial. Cold Blues, the name of the show. 5th annual Jimi Hendrix birthday broadcast. I'm on the phone with the guy who actually designed Electric Lady Studio, among other feats there. And his name is John Storyk. And let me tell you something. This is the guy. And, you know, John, you brought up a point earlier. The industry has gotten... I heard you say a quote. The industry has gotten more democratic. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, the artist takes control. This has been my theme. Electric Lady celebrated its 40th anniversary a few years ago. It had a rather nice event that took place in the New York City pro audio community, and it was a kind of a reunion / presentation / party. And you know, I hadn't been back in that studio in 25 years. I just had no reason to go there. I've since become pretty good friends with its manager, who's doing an incredible job in giving that studio a new birth, Lee Foster. He's become a dear friend. But in thinking about what actually happened in 1969, what I had to sort of try to give it a title in my own mind, over and above the fact that we just built this studio. And basically that's what I kind of viewed this as, the artist taking control. Basically, the art of music making becoming more democratic. And if you envision the creation of Electric Lady Studios and other studios like that in that great era, the end of the 60s, which of course extended into the mid-70s, as the tip of the iceberg, okay, the bottom of the iceberg is iTunes, is where we are now.
Yeah.
Basically, everybody has a recording studio. You got a Mac, you have a recording studio. And that scares people. It scares
the guys who got the $1 million studios. That's for sure.
Well, yes and no. It scares lots of people. It scares anybody that's not into change. It scares anybody that's into keeping it where it is. That's who it scares, but it doesn't scare people who embrace change,
yes,
and including people who have $1 million studios. There are still quite a few what you call multi-million-dollar, or what I would call mothership studios, big, large facilities, usually taking place either in city centers or in destinations like Avatar, Electric Lady Studios, Jungle. These are state-of-the-art studios in New York, Ocean Way, record plant in L.A., et cetera, et cetera. We're always going to have those big rooms. Those are rooms that require a lot of real estate. They require very heavy equipment for certain kinds of uses. However, along with those, and we're going to have less of those, are 20,000 other smaller studios that used to be called home studios and that used to be called project studios. But I'm suggesting that we throw away those names. Just, I don't know, give them another name. And what's changed is the business model. Okay, now engineering collectives own studios. 3 engineers get together, they build a studio because they have the work. And they don't need the record companies to start their records. They need the record companies to distribute their records. Actually, they don't even need those anymore. You need an iTunes account. And so everything's changed. As I said, some people are scared of these changes. Some people have trouble embracing them. And then other people, you know, like my 9-year-old grandson, thinks that this is the way it's supposed to be. So You figure it out. You tell our listeners, not your listeners, our listeners today. Everybody figures this out in exactly the way they're supposed to be figuring it out. I'm an architect, an acoustician. I'm not predicting the future. I'm just looking back and watching what a great guitar player, and that's what Jimmy was, and a great musician, envisioned as an alternate way to make music. And we're thankful that he had that vision. I for one, it changed my life. I'm indebted to Jimmy forever, and to Eddie.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you something about switching gears. Let's go to Marley. I'm like the biggest Marley freak. And did you design Tough Gong?
Well, I designed. He had a number of studios down there. I did his very first early one. My experience with Bob was minimum. I went down there on one trip, spent basically 2 nights with Bob. If you think Jimmy was mysterious and hard to, not necessarily hard, but you had to work to get engaged with him. Bob was even harder. I actually lived in Kingston for a week and drew the studio. I think it morphed 2 or 3 times over. But it was a very special week. I'll remember that forever. That's for sure.
Interesting. And how can people find out more information about you as a designer?
Well, we have a webpage. I mean, I'm work every single day. I love my work. I have long since gotten past the point of having to work. I enjoy it. We have about between 40 and 50 people in 5 offices worldwide that just design basically technology architecture. And our company is Walters-Storyk Design Group. Walters is my wife and partner, Beth Walters. And that's our company, Walters-Storyk Design Group, or WSDG. And that's what we do. It's funny, I'd love to have $1 for everybody who says, I guess you don't have any work anymore because there are no studios. And actually, it's about the furthest from the truth.
Oh, totally.
There are more studios than ever before. They're just different. The business models are different. Their sizes and scales are different. The equipment configurations are different. But there's more studios being created than ever before. It's an exciting time in the studio and in the content creation world.
And not just for audio, definitely for visual. The film industry has opened up big time thanks to the small studios.
It's huge. And also, the boundaries between which industry you're in, if we call these industries, whether you're in the film industry or the broadcasting industry or the music-only industry, those boundaries are all smeared. Okay? They're not black and line. They're not lines in the sand anymore. Okay? And they're also not geocentric. It used to be that everything took place in only a few centers, i.e. New York, Chicago, L.A. That's completely smeared. Mm-hmm. Okay, somebody can be recorded, can be in a upstate New York farm and record an artist in Los Angeles with a telephone line, as we know.
Happens every day.
So, every single day. I'm, like right now, not even sure where you are. I kind of think I know where you are. But one thing I know is that I'm not in your studio.
For sure.
Okay, but so, those boundaries, those lines, they've disappeared a long time ago. And, of course, what's happened is the equipment has gotten less expensive in absolute dollars. It's one of the few industries where things actually cost less, not in relative dollars, but in absolute dollars.
Good point. Yeah.
And it's exciting. Why? Because we're really in the, we're hooked to the computer business. So that's exciting. So that's what I mean by more democratic. The pain and suffering to enter has been minimalized. Almost anybody can jump on. But that was not the case in 1960. In 1969, if you wanted a console, you didn't go to the web and order one. You can get a console. You can buy a console for $5,000. 1969, you had to order one. Mm-hmm. It was built in your studio, or partially built and shipped in and wired. Weeks and weeks of work. People buy consoles now like they buy sandwiches. It's exciting.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by more democratic.
And it stepped up the game of the music industry as well as the film industry as well.
Exactly, and it's of course trickled down through all aspects of our industry, broadcasting, any kind of content delivery. And some people have not had fun with it. Okay, if you're in the sticks and bricks CD delivery business, you're not having fun because there are less CDs. Okay. On the other hand, if you're an artist that doesn't need a record company anymore, I'm not saying that record companies don't serve an extremely valuable function, but you as an artist can make your own record, go on the road, sell 5,000 CDs, and make the same amount of money.
Yeah.
So, you tell me who's winning and who's losing. What it's really about is who's adjusting, who's changing, and who's excited by the new times.
Well, I would say the artist is definitely getting the better end of this. I mean, it's good to say for once, you know.
For once, yes, he wasn't for a while. It was confusing. I remember talking to somebody who, no names mentioned, who proudly had told me, this was about 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, that they'd successfully downloaded 27,000 songs and hadn't paid a penny for them. And I looked at them and I said, you know, as an economic model, that's unsustainable. That's not going to work. Somebody has to pay for something, or there aren't going to be any songs. And, you know, it's kind of funny that it took a computer geek, basically Steve Jobs, to at least make a stab at figuring it out. Say what you want about him, but there was a moment in our cultural history when the two biggest sellers of music was a coffee company and a computer company. Starbucks and Apple. So, you know, what's right and what's wrong depends on what, you know, depends on where you are in that picture.
Wow.
But you're right. The artist is I think on the verge of really getting their due and really getting a fair shake and really getting a fair opportunity. Then it's up to the artist to make the music. None of this has anything to do with how good the music is. That's another radio show.
Yeah, we won't get into that. But to put it, you know, to bottom line everything, Jimmy was one of the vanguards who led that vision of the artist having the control.
Well, absolutely. He led it in his music. You know, some people arrive and they seem to be directly plugged into an original soul, an original musical inspiration. Jimmy was one of them. I mean, like Mozart almost. I can remember almost to the day the first time I heard him play guitar, which was at this club that he ended up buying. And actually, I'd never seen a left-handed guitar player, so that was the first. I said, "Wait a second, isn't that backwards?" Of course, you know, not being a guitar player, I didn't even realize what I was seeing at first. And you know, everything he did, that was his vision of his music, of his life, and his architectural vision. We didn't spend a lot of time talking about it, but he did have a vision. I remember one day he was in the studio one afternoon, and we had all the doors were installed, and these are expensive doors. They all had little pieces of glass in them for vision, and he just said quietly to Eddie and I, he said, "You think we could just make all the windows round instead of square? I mean, these doors are expensive and they're already installed." And sure enough, they all came off and they all went back with round windows. Wow. I mean, he just had an image. He just had a vision of what things wanted to feel like and be like. I mean, he, you know, didn't read drawings or anything like that. He sort of left that up to us, but it was great to be around that vision. It had a big influence in my life, that's for sure.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that with us, man. You gave us a lot of insight that otherwise wouldn't have been gotten, at least by me, man, for sure, man. And I appreciate you spending the time here with us, man, for sure. Great,
and I appreciate being on the show, and thanks for reminding us all to remember Jimmy's music. It's going to be with us forever.
Yeah, you'll be hearing from me again. I'd like to thank Charles, mutual friend, for hooking us up, man.
Great. And all right, we'll be in touch.
Yeah, I respect what you're doing, and you take care of yourself, man.
Thanks a lot, man. Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.
89.1 FM WFDU, Cold Blues, the name of the show, 5th annual Hendrix birthday broadcast. We just got off the phone with John Storyk, designer